Welcome to the Growth Mindset Center, YouTube. Please take a moment of your precious time and generosity to click the subscribe button, comment. Thank you very much. Please listen to the next great content. What builds unstoppable confidence isn't talent or charm, it's consistency in what you do when no one's watching. Ever wondered why some people keep rising even when everything falls apart? Their confidence isn't inherited, it's engineered. The secret to bulletproof confidence lies not in motivation, but in mastering your behavior. Let's explore how. Confidence isn't a gift, it's a result. It's not something you're born with, it's not something other people hand you. And it doesn't come from... This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, hype. Real confidence is built layer by layer through repetition, through challenge, through consistency. It's created by what you do daily, not what you say occasionally. It doesn't show up when life is easy. It shows up when you've trained yourself to stay grounded when things get hard. That's the kind of confidence. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity that lasts. That leads, that performs under pressure, and doesn't flinch when things get messy. The reason most people don't feel confident isn't because they're not capable. It's because they've built their identity on feelings instead of follow-through. They've told themselves that confidence will come when things get better, when they get more. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Validation, when someone else sees their potential. But confidence doesn't come from being seen, it comes from seeing yourself clearly and honoring that with your actions. You don't wait to feel confident. You build it through behavior, through decision, through becoming someone you can count on, and that process doesn't depend on other people. It doesn't require perfect conditions. It starts with, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. How you lead yourself, how you keep your word, how you hold your standard. Because confidence is the byproduct of integrity, of self-trust, of alignment between who you say you are and how you actually move. You build it when you do hard things on purpose, when you finish what you start, when you show up even when you don't feel like it. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You make decisions based on who you're becoming, not who you've been. Every time you honor your identity instead of your insecurity, you earn a piece of confidence. And when you stack those pieces day after day, they turn into something unshakable. The biggest lie is that confidence is about image. That it's about how you look, how you sound. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, how you're perceived. But the strongest confidence doesn't come from being impressive. It comes from being consistent. Now, the most grounded people don't need to prove anything because they know they're living aligned. They know they're honoring their standard. They don't need to announce their confidence because their energy already speaks. This is not about theory, it's about practice. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. It's about 9 specific practices that will build real, lasting, repeatable confidence. Not based on hype, but on identity. Not based on noise, but on quiet discipline. These practices are how you shift your mindset from fragile to focused. How you stop needing permission and start walking in certainty. How you move from hoping to trusting, and not just in your potential. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, but in your process. These 9 practices are about who you become when no one is clapping, when the lights are off. When it's just you, your habits, and your standard, that's where confidence is created. Not when everything is going well, but when you stay consistent through the chaos. When your decisions don't change just because the conditions do, you don't need to be louder. You. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to impress anyone. You just need to keep the promises that matter. You need to stop outsourcing your belief to the outside world. You need to start living like someone who is worthy of respect, starting with your own. Because when you trust yourself, you stop asking other people to do it for you. Confidence. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Is not about ego. It's about ownership. And when you live with ownership over your time, your energy, your habits, your behavior, you start to build something no one can take from you. Something that doesn't shake when things get difficult. Something that holds even when everything else feels uncertain. That's what these practices will help you build. The first, powerful. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Practice that creates unstoppable confidence is to build the habit of keeping promises to yourself. Not when it's easy, not when it's convenient, but always. This is the foundation. Because your confidence doesn't come from what you say, it comes from what you do. From the track record you build with yourself day after day, whether anyone sees it or this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Not. The moment you make a promise, you create tension. A line is drawn. Who you say you are steps forward, but then your behavior either honors that or betrays it. Every time you follow through, you reinforce belief. Every time you don't, you reinforce doubt. And those reinforcements over time become your identity. Most people don't realize how this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Often they're telling themselves they can't be trusted. They say, "I'll wake up at 6," but they snooze the alarm. "I'll stick to the plan," but they drift. "I'll start tomorrow," but they delay. Those decisions seem small, but they're loud. They tell your brain that your word isn't strong, that your behavior isn't aligned. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, that your intention doesn't matter. And if your own word doesn't matter to you, how can confidence grow? Keeping promises to yourself is about building internal respect. You wouldn't trust a friend who constantly cancels on you, so why do you tolerate it from yourself? Confidence is self-trust, and trust is built in repetition. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Not once, not when it's exciting, not when the mood is right, but over and over, especially when it's hard. Start small. Choose one commitment. Make it daily. Make it visible. Make it specific. I will stretch for 5 minutes every morning. I will write for 20 minutes after lunch. I will review my priorities before. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. I check my messages. Keep it tight, clear, measurable, and then guard it like your identity depends on it, because it does. The goal isn't volume, it's consistency. Because one small promise kept daily builds more confidence than 10 big promises broken weekly. The discipline isn't in how much, it's in how steady. You build the habit of, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Showing up. The habit of not negotiating, the habit of honoring the commitment, not the mood. Over time, those small kept promises stack up. You stop thinking about whether you're motivated. You just do it. You stop wrestling with your own logic. You act. The decision was made yesterday. The plan is already clear. Your identity leads, and action follows. And this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Here's where the shift happens. Your self-talk changes. You stop saying, "I hope I stay on track." And you start saying, "I'm the kind of person who follows through." That internal sentence is power. Because once your behavior matches your identity, you stop needing to force things. You start flowing. Your energy shifts. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. People notice. You don't need to talk about what you're doing. They feel it because there's weight behind your words now. There's proof behind your posture. You don't have to chase confidence. You carry it. Quiet, steady, unshakable. The world keeps saying just believe in yourself, but belief isn't given. It's built. And you build it. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. One kept promise at a time. One small act of integrity that reminds your brain, I do what I say. You don't break the chain. You don't negotiate. You don't perform. You honor. You respect. You reinforce. You won't always feel like it. That's the point. That's what makes it confidence building. Because when you do it anyway, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You prove to yourself that you can lead yourself. And that kind of proof, that's the kind no one can take away. That's where real confidence is born. Next, the second practice that makes you unstoppable is to confront your patterns instead of repeating them. Most people live their entire lives running the same internal scripts. Scripts they never. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Rote but still obey. Scripts like, I always mess this up. This is just who I am. I'll probably fail again. Or, things never work out for me. These phrases become beliefs. These beliefs become behavior. And that behavior becomes identity. If you don't pause to examine your patterns, you'll spend your life reinforcing the very thing that's keeping you stuck. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Confidence can't grow in someone who is afraid to investigate their own thoughts. And because your patterns don't care about your goals, they'll always pull you back into what's familiar. Even if it's destructive, even if it keeps you small, even if it directly contradicts what you say you want. You can't outperform your patterns. Not long-term, not sustainably. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Habits, your self-talk, your environment, and your daily choices are still built to support who you used to be. No amount of motivation will move you forward. You'll burn out. You'll sabotage progress. You'll recreate the same cycles with new people, new projects, new plans until you do the work of pattern recognition. Start by asking yourself where you drift. When do you lose focus? What situations trigger? This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Self-doubt? What phrases do you repeat when you're under pressure? What behaviors do you default to when you feel uncertain? These questions aren't always comfortable, but they're necessary because the more you see, the more you can shift. Awareness is the first step to power. Most people don't change because they don't think they need to. They've convinced themselves that the results they're getting are because of DAI. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. External things, when in reality it's the unexamined patterns running their day. But once you see it, you can challenge it. And once you challenge it, you can replace it. You replace your patterns with intention. You start writing a new script, not by lying to yourself, but by creating a new default. You interrupt the old sentence and replace it with, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Alignment. You stop saying, I always quit, and start saying, I finish things now. You stop saying, I always mess this up, and start saying, I'm learning how to stay locked in. And then, this is critical. You act in accordance with that new statement. Behavior is what builds belief. You can't just say it. You have to live it even if. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. It's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because every time you take action that breaks the old pattern, you reclaim power. You shrink the grip that the old identity had on you, and you start building one that aligns with the future you've already decided to create. Confidence grows every time you face your resistance. When you know what used by. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. To break you, but you show up different. When you walk into the situation that used to trigger you, but this time you stay calm. You respond with clarity. You finish the thing you used to run from. You hold the standard you used to negotiate. That's what change feels like. Not hype, ownership. You become someone who leads yourself. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Not because you never drift, but because you no longer pretend not to see it. Because you catch the drift sooner. You respond faster. You stop letting patterns run your life. And that kind of awareness, that kind of authority, that's what creates the kind of confidence that sticks. You don't need to fix everything at once. You need to study. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. One pattern, one moment, one trigger. Track it, shift it, replace it, then repeat. One upgrade at a time, one adjustment at a time, one layer of alignment at a time. Confidence doesn't need to be dramatic. It needs to be consistent. Next, the third practice that builds unstoppable confidence is to speak to yourself with clarity. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, not comfort. The voice in your head is the narrator of your life. It shapes how you see yourself. It colors how you interpret your failures. It determines how you respond when things get hard. And if that voice is undisciplined, if it's vague, if it's constantly making excuses and softening the truth, it will. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Rob you of confidence one sentence at a time. You cannot build a strong identity with soft language. You can't say maybe I'll try and expect to believe in yourself. You can't say I'll get to it eventually and expect to act with urgency. You can't tell yourself, this is probably too hard, and expect to find energy. Words matter. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. The ones you say out loud, and especially the ones you whisper in your own mind. Clarity is the language of confidence. When you speak with precision, you direct your energy. You say, I'm doing this today. This is the plan. This is the standard. This is non-negotiable. And you repeat those phrases until your subconscious, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, believes them. Until your body moves in alignment with them, until your life reflects them. Comfort-based self-talk will always look for the way out. It'll say, you've done enough. Take it easy. You'll do better tomorrow. And while those phrases sound kind, they quietly train your mind to believe this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. That your feelings are more important than your goals, that your comfort is more important than your consistency, that your identity should be based on emotion. But when you start speaking clearly, everything changes. You stop coddling your weakness. You stop enabling your drift. You start telling the truth, not in a way that this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, tears you down, but in a way that holds you up, that says, this isn't who I am anymore. We don't skip that. We don't delay this. We move. You speak to yourself like someone who's going somewhere, like someone who leads themselves, like someone who keeps the promise, especially when no one else is listening. And this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. When you do that consistently, your internal dialogue becomes your fuel, not your fight. But clarity doesn't just happen. You train it. You journal. You review. You reflect. You write down your patterns, your goals, your intentions. You give yourself specific language to use when resistance shows up. You rehearse how you'll respond to doubt, how you'll talk. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. To yourself when things get messy, when you fail, when you drift. You remove phrases like, "I'll try," "I'm not sure," "I hope," and replace them with, "I will," "I've decided." This is the way. Not because you know every step, but because you know how to walk forward. You speak like someone who owns the journey, and this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Eventually, your brain starts believing you. This is how you make confidence automatic. Not because you always feel great, but because your language doesn't collapse under pressure. Because when your body gets tired, your mind says one more. When your plan gets shaky, your voice says, "We adjust, but we don't quit." When fear gets, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Loud, your clarity is louder. Your voice becomes your leadership. Not because it's louder than your emotions, but because it's more consistent. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't waffle. It doesn't start and stop. It holds. And when your voice holds, your identity strengthens. Your standard rises. Your actions follow. Next, the fourth practice that creates unstoppable confidence is, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. To stack evidence, not emotion. Most people try to feel confident before they act. They wait for certainty, for clarity, for a surge of motivation to push them into movement. But that version of confidence is fragile. It only works when you feel strong. The second doubt creeps in, it collapses. That's because it was built on emotion, not proof. Real confidence is built on, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Evidence, not hype, not theory. Proof. Tangible, visible proof that you've done hard things, that you've kept your word, that you've followed through, that you've trained, you've endured, you've shown up when it wasn't easy. That stack of proof becomes your backbone. It becomes the thing you lean on when your mind starts lying. When your feelings say, "You can't do this." This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. And your behavior says, "I've done it before, and I'll do it again." Every time you follow through on something difficult, you earn a receipt. You earn evidence. That rep at the gym when you wanted to stop, that's evidence. That early morning when you got up anyway, evidence. That conversation you led with, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Strength instead of fear. Evidence. These moments aren't small. They're critical. They're stacking belief. Emotion is temporary. It fluctuates. But evidence is stable. It reinforces itself. You look back and see a pattern, and that pattern becomes identity. The more you show up with discipline, the more confidence becomes inevitable. Not because you feel great. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, but because your life proves it. You stop needing to talk yourself into confidence. You stop needing other people to reassure you. You have the data. You have the receipts. You've done the work. You've earned your belief. Not through fantasy, but through behavior. And no one can take that from you. This means you start tracking your This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Wins, not just the big ones, the daily ones. Because most confidence is lost in forgetfulness. We forget how far we've come. We forget how often we've been resilient. We forget how many times we followed through. But when you track it, when you write it down, when you revisit it, you remember. And remembering builds belief. Create a confidence file. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. A daily log. A moment where you reflect on one hard thing you did that day and record it. Today I didn't hit snooze. Today I said no to something that drained me. Today I focused when I didn't feel like it. These wins build a trail, a track record, a personal archive that becomes unshakable over time. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Doubt hits, and it will. You'll have something to open, something to read, something to remember, not to hype yourself up, but to remind yourself what's true. Confidence doesn't require certainty. It requires reference. And when your life becomes a reference point for resilience, you stop doubting every decision. And don't wait for massive wins to validate you. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. The smallest actions done consistently prove the most. Confidence is not in one huge moment. It's in daily deposits. The 5 minutes you showed up when it was easier not to. The difficult thing you finished when quitting was an option. That's where it's built. Eventually you start moving differently. You stop chasing permission. You stop hoping to feel ready. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You just lead because your evidence is solid, your system is working, your identity is proven. And no feeling can dismantle what your track record has already established. Okay, now, here's the 5th powerful practice that builds confidence. You must deliberately engineer challenge into your life. Most people wait for life to push them, hoping that maybe the next hard. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Season will strengthen them. But waiting for challenge to find you is a passive way to build character. Confidence comes from taking the lead, from choosing challenge before it chooses you, from deliberately doing the things that are hard on purpose. Comfort is the enemy of confidence because comfort convinces you that you're strong when really you're just untested. It feels good. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. It feels safe, but it also keeps you from growing. And the longer you stay in comfort, the less capable you feel when things inevitably go sideways because now you're soft. You're uncertain. You haven't practiced adversity. Confidence built in comfort is surface level. It's fragile. It breaks under pressure. But when you voluntarily, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Put yourself in pressure. You train resilience. You develop grit. You don't panic when things get tough because you've practiced doing hard things. You've put yourself in uncomfortable conditions. You've stayed steady when your body said, stop. This isn't about suffering. It's about stretching. Choosing to expose yourself to, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, environments, routines, and challenges that sharpen you. You take the stairs instead of the elevator. You choose the conversation you've been avoiding. You get up without snoozing. You write even when you feel blocked. You train when you're tired. These acts don't just build results, they build confidence. Because every time you do something, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Hard. You rewire your identity. You tell yourself, I do hard things. That sentence is powerful. It becomes your new narrative. You stop flinching. You stop hesitating. You stop letting resistance dictate your day, because you've trained yourself to expect discomfort and to move anyway. The people who perform at the highest levels don't look for. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, ease. They design challenge. They set higher standards. They remove the crutches. They raise the stakes because they know the more they train under pressure, the less pressure surprises them. And the more pressure you can hold, the more confident you become. You create this through habits that intentionally create resistance. Cold showers, long runs, deep focus. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Work with no distractions, days without comfort food, difficult conversations. These aren't just activities. They're reminders that you're capable of more, that you're not ruled by ease, that you can lean into the edge and not fall apart. Confidence doesn't just come from doing what you already know. It comes from putting yourself in unfamiliar. Tyler, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, territory, and watching yourself lead anyway. It comes from proving to your brain over and over again that fear doesn't control your actions, that hesitation doesn't stall your standards, that discomfort doesn't mean stop. It means grow. You don't wait for life to get difficult. You prepare for it. You make challenge your this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, ally. You normalize friction. And because you've done that, when real adversity shows up, you're ready. Not because you're special, but because you've trained. You've been here before. You've held the weight. You finished the reps, and now confidence isn't a guess, it's a pattern. Next, the sixth practice. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. That builds unstoppable confidence is to define your standard and never negotiate with it. You can't be confident if you don't know what your standard is. You can't lead yourself if your expectations are unclear, and you won't follow through if the rules change every time life gets inconvenient. A clear standard is this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, boundary between who you were and who you're becoming. It's the code you operate by, even when no one else does. Most people let the day decide their standard. They let their energy set the tone. They let other people's urgency rewrite their priorities. But when you know your standard, you stop bending. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You stop justifying. You stop letting external circumstances hijack your internal code because your behavior isn't driven by the moment. It's driven by the mission. Your standard is your contract with your future. When you lower it, you delay your own evolution. You tell your brain that your word doesn't matter. That effort is dorg. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, optional. That success is conditional. But when your standard is fixed, when it holds through fatigue, frustration, and distraction, confidence follows. Because confidence grows in the presence of alignment. You define your standard by deciding what is no longer negotiable. Not what you hope to do, not what you try to do, what you will do, what gets done. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, no matter how you feel. The morning routine that never slips, the focus time that never moves, the bedtime that doesn't flex, the workout that always happens. These aren't tasks. These are anchors. They make discipline sustainable. When you define your standard, you eliminate decision fatigue. You no longer wake up and ask, "Should I do it today?" This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You just do it. It's not a choice anymore. It's who you are. You don't argue with your standard, you follow it. And that clarity frees up energy. It frees up time. It frees up focus. And when you follow your standard, especially when it's hard, you build a different level of self-respect. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Trust yourself more. You hesitate less. You think faster. You execute cleaner. You move like someone who is already aligned because you are. You're not chasing excellence. You're reinforcing it. Confidence doesn't come from hitting one goal. It comes from becoming the kind of person who meets their standard daily. You stop needing outside. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Reminders. You stop needing external accountability. You lead yourself because you've trained your system to follow a code, but the standard only works if you protect it. And you protect it by having non-negotiables, boundaries, lines you don't cross, times you don't give up, places in your schedule that don't move. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Start living like that. People notice. But more importantly, you notice. You stop feeling scattered. You stop feeling behind. You stop feeling inconsistent. You're in rhythm. Eventually, the standard becomes so normal that not following it feels wrong. That's when discipline becomes easy. Not because it's less demanding, but because it's more automatic. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. A clear standard does. It doesn't just guide you, it transforms you. Next, the seventh way to build confidence is to lead your environment instead of being led by it. Most people let their surroundings dictate their state. The noise, the pressure, the schedule, the inputs, all of it quietly shapes their decisions without them realizing it. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You let your environment steer your behavior, the less you control your trajectory. Confidence begins to erode, not because you've changed, but because your space is pulling you out of alignment. You can't master self-discipline in a disorganized world. If your environment is full of friction, your habits will always be harder than they need to be. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You try to focus, you're surrounded by clutter, noise, distractions. You'll always be fighting for clarity. And that daily resistance, that constant interruption, it breaks flow, it breaks rhythm. It slowly chips away at your self-respect. The people who lead themselves well don't just manage their time, they manage their space. They take control. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity of their inputs. They audit what they allow into their mind, their calendar, their conversations. They design their environments to pull them into discipline, not temptation. They make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong one. You don't rise to the level of your potential. You fall to the level. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Level of your structure. And structure isn't just internal, it's external too. It's your desk, your kitchen, your car, your schedule, your music, your energy, your circle. It all matters. If your space doesn't align with who you're becoming, it will keep you tied to who you were. Confidence grows in spaces that support your standard. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Morning routine flows because your environment is clear. When your meals are aligned, because the distractions have been removed. When your phone isn't within reach during deep work. When your relationships don't require you to lower your standard to be understood. These little adjustments change how you carry yourself. Environment isn't just physical, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Relational. If you're surrounded by people who don't respect discipline, your discipline becomes harder to maintain. If your closest circle lives in chaos, you'll start accepting chaos. If the people you speak with daily have no urgency, no vision, no accountability, you'll eventually slow down to match their pace. So, you lead, you elevate the room, you filter your conversations. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You stop entertaining energy that pulls you out of alignment. You protect your time. You guard your focus. You raise the standard not just for yourself, but for what's allowed to influence you. You don't need to control everything, but you do need to lead your space. You remove friction. You simplify. You declutter. You design. You take ownership of this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Your environment. Like it matters because it does. And when your space starts to reflect your identity, your confidence rises without effort. Eventually, the environment becomes automatic support. Your systems flow, your space holds the line, your rhythm builds momentum, and that momentum, that's how discipline becomes easier. Not because life gets quiet. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, but because you stopped letting the noise lead. The eighth powerful practice that makes you unstoppable is to become the source of your own validation. Most people tie their sense of worth to external approval. They rely on recognition, attention, applause. They wait to be acknowledged before they believe. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. They're enough. But confidence that depends on validation is temporary. It fades the moment the compliments stop. It evaporates the second someone questions your ability. If your identity needs to be reinforced from the outside, you will always be chasing it. You'll always need one more person to say you're doing great. One more. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Comment. One more post. One more like. And when that feedback doesn't come, your motivation collapses, your standard lowers, your habits erode because you were building from the wrong source. Unshakable confidence comes from knowing that what you're doing is aligned whether anyone sees it or not. It comes from creating your own scorecard. It comes from asking yourself, did I show up the way I... This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Said I would. Did I honor my process? Did I live with integrity today? If the answer is yes, you win. Not because someone said so, but because you know that internal validation gives you freedom. Freedom to move without needing permission. Freedom to be consistent without the hype. Freedom to lead without constantly asking, am I good enough? When you know this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, value. The noise doesn't shake you because you've already decided who you are and you live like it. To build this, you have to stop outsourcing your self-respect. You have to stop handing your identity to people who don't carry your vision. You stop measuring your worth by how you're received and start measuring it by how you show up. You stop looking for applause and start building patterns. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity that align with your values. You do this by creating rituals of self-validation, end-of-day reflections, internal audits, moments where you check in and ask, was I excellent today? Not an outcome, but in effort, in attitude, in intention. Because when you validate yourself daily, you stop needing the world to do it for you. This doesn't mean you isolate. It means you lead. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. can receive feedback, but you don't require it to feel whole. You can accept encouragement, but your actions don't depend on it. That's strength. That's independence. That's self-leadership, and confidence can only live where leadership has taken root. Eventually, you become someone who walks into a room and doesn't need. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, to be noticed because your presence speaks louder than your words. You're not waiting to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. You don't beg to belong. You belong because you're aligned, because you've built belief from behavior. And when life gets quiet, when no one sees the effort, you don't collapse. You keep going. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, because your approval isn't external. It's earned, and you're the one who gives it. That's where confidence becomes permanent. That's where discipline becomes automatic. That's where peace begins. Next, the 9th practice that will make you confident is to finish what you start. It sounds simple, but it's one of the rarest traits. Most people. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, start strong and fade. They commit with energy and disappear when the excitement fades. They get hyped at the beginning and lose focus somewhere in the middle. But confidence can't grow in unfinished work. Confidence grows when you cross the finish line. When you prove to yourself that you're not just a starter, you're a finisher. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Time you leave something undone, you leave a dent in your belief. You reinforce the identity of someone who doesn't follow through. It's not about the size of the project. It's about the habit. If you make a habit of quitting, you'll carry that habit into every area of your life. It becomes a reflex. Start. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Stall, excuse, repeat. That's not failure. That's erosion. But when you build the habit of finishing, everything changes, because now your brain starts seeing yourself differently. You stop being someone who tries. You become someone who does. You stop calling yourself a perfectionist and start calling yourself a finisher. You don't need the work. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, to be flawless. You need it to be done. Finishing builds trust. Every rep you complete, every chapter you close, every rep you don't skip, those aren't just tasks. They're deposits into your identity. You prove that your word matters, that your behavior matches your standard, that when you say something will happen, it does. To build this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Habit. You must start small. Pick something you've left hanging, a workout you planned and never completed, a chapter you said you'd write, a plan you said you'd finalize. Block time. Return to it. Finish it. Not because it's urgent, but because your identity is worth reinforcing. You must redefine what it means to finish. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Doesn't mean perfect. It means done with effort, done with integrity, done with presence. Don't aim for polish. Aim for closure. Get it out. Get it delivered. Cross it off. That act of closing loops gives your brain peace. It frees energy. It restores confidence. Your brain loves closure. It hates open tabs. Incomplete tasks don't. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Just linger. They steal mental bandwidth. They make you feel behind. They make you doubt your capacity. But when you start closing the loop, you create space. You create momentum. You tell yourself, I'm in control again. Confidence is not just a feeling. It's a history, a record, a track of repeated behavior that tells your mind. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. We follow through here. That's what creates the kind of person who doesn't flinch under pressure, who doesn't panic when it gets difficult, because you've built evidence. You finished the thing before, and you'll finish this one too. Finishing gives you feedback. It teaches you what works. It exposes what doesn't. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Stronger from completion, not from perfect starts. You get data. You get truth. And that truth becomes wisdom. You can't gain that insight by stopping halfway. You have to stay long enough to finish. And when you finish something difficult, you don't just get the result. You get the confidence that came with. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. The process. That's where the edge comes from. Not from talking. Not from planning, from doing, from closing, from executing when others stall. That's the difference maker. You've now walked through the 9 practices that build unstoppable confidence. Not a confidence based on appearance, hype, or ego, but a confidence built. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, from action, from identity, from integrity. These aren't motivational ideas, they're practical disciplines. They're the quiet, unshakable patterns that create momentum, belief, and strength. No matter the season, no matter the pressure, you've learned that confidence starts with keeping promises to yourself, that your word matters most when it's private, that your belief, this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity in yourself is earned, not inherited, that every time you do what you said, you do even when it's invisible. You build something that lasts. You've studied your patterns. You've stopped blaming the outside world. You've started taking ownership of what's happening inside. Confidence isn't found. It's created by. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, confronting your drift, your defaults, your resistance. You've learned that transformation doesn't begin with motivation. It begins with pattern awareness. And leadership starts with self-awareness. You've rewired your language. You've traded soft, vague phrases for clear, powerful ones. You don't whisper, "I hope," anymore. You declare, "I move. I execute. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. To finish. Your voice leads you now, not your doubt, because your clarity has taken command. You've built evidence, tangible proof, that you're not a tourist in your goals. You're an inhabitant. You live it. You do the hard things. You finish what you start. And you've learned to track those wins, to log the behavior, to collect this is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity, receipts. Because real confidence is a record of how you've lived, not how you've hoped. You've stopped waiting for challenge to build you. You've engineered it on purpose. You've trained under pressure so you don't collapse under chaos. You've chosen discomfort so you could build capacity, because you know now comfort never grows you. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. Stretch does. You've defined your standard. You've made it non-negotiable. You've stopped letting emotion rewrite your code. You don't ask yourself if you feel like showing up. You show up because your standard is no longer up for debate. And when the standard becomes the habit, confidence becomes the byproduct. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. stopped letting your environment lead you. You've taken control of your inputs. You've removed the friction. You've made excellence easier to access. You've set boundaries. You've led your space. And in doing so, you've aligned your surroundings with your vision. That's how you create an ecosystem for success. You've stopped outsourcing your worth. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. You don't beg for validation. You don't perform for applause. You're your own mirror now. You measure your alignment by how you live, not by how others respond. That's what makes you unshakable. That's why you can move quietly and still lead powerfully. And you've become a finisher, not a starter, not a dreamer. Someone who closes the loop, who stays. This is the moment where self-trust begins to shape into lasting identity. When others stall, who moves when others flinch, who crosses the line not once, but over and over again. That's how real confidence is built in motion, in resilience, in the repetition of truth. Thank you for listening, and subscribe, comment on the channel,